this match kind of forgettable, really, when you look back in the history of FA Cup finals. But history, of course, will tell us that Liverpool are once again the champions for the 8th time in the history of the club. And once again, this game ends in a draw, as it did in the 3 previous occasions in 90 minutes. Boys, we talked a lot about Liverpool. Let's focus on Chelsea. How much was this a missed opportunity for Thomas Tuchel's side, considering you go into extra time, there's no Salah, there's no Van Dijk, clearly Liverpool are tired. Chelsea just couldn't really find that extra gear, could they?
No, they couldn't. I thought they had some good performers. I thought Rudiger played really well. I thought in the middle of midfield, I think Jorginho done quite well. I think they were just, me and Nathan were trying to guess through the first 90 minutes how the game was going. Were Liverpool dominating the game? And then we come to the conclusion it was Liverpool's first 20 minutes, then 20 odd so minutes of Chelsea. Then it was a similar sort of story in the second half, where I think the game went in waves. But I think if you're in that Chelsea dressing room, Dan, you'll be so disappointed from a very promising start of the season. A couple of trophies in the bag, you think everything's going well, manager's fantastic manager, they've got a manager that's going to take them to another levels, then off the field problems kicked in, 1 or 2 players are obviously on the move. I don't think that affected them. I just don't think they had enough to beat Liverpool.
Yeah, and I think that's a shame, really, because you see the season, in 90 minutes they've not lost to them. They've literally matched them all the way. Liverpool might end up with 4 and Chelsea end up for this season essentially without anything to show for it. So it is a shame. They did feel like they were in ascendancy a little bit, but realistically, how many more clear-cut chances did it create after that sort of first spell? I think at the start of the second half. Yeah. So they will be disappointed. I think this was a great opportunity for them. But the reality of the situation is Liverpool can rotate, people can make changes, and it can still be Liverpool. It
felt once they took Romelu Lukaku off, Dan, we were like, you're seeing people like Mason Mount, and you see Hakim Ziyech and Christian Pulisic, good players but diminutive players. And you start to think, well, have they lost a little bit of strength in Lukaku? There was no outball. All of a sudden, if you're Joel Matip or if Virgil was on at the time and Konate, you're thinking they're not going to be a threat. So the longer the game went on with their diminutive front line, it felt as though it took it slightly away from Chelsea.
Yeah, it certainly did feel that way, but there's still enough players on the field to be able to score. When they look back across this game and the Carabao Cup to a certain extent as well, to not have registered a goal in those 2 matches, you can see how costly it can be, because as soon as you go to penalties, it's a lottery. And in this moment, Alisson just stepped up and he was essentially the difference.
Diaz was standing behind us, Dan, and he got man of the match. I thought he was absolutely unplayable.
Yeah, he was electric throughout, wasn't he?
The other thing is Thomas Tuchel is difficult to figure out at the moment in terms of who he's putting on, who he's selecting to start. You think about Timo Werner, who's had a troublesome time at Chelsea. In all fairness, the last few weeks, his form's been better, right? He's looked sharper, he's looked in a better place. And yet, OK, he doesn't start, but guess what? When Liverpool were absolutely knackered, the one thing he'll do, he'll run him behind. He's fast, he's pacey, and yet he doesn't even get off the bench today, and yet he's been having one of the better periods of his Chelsea career. I kind of think Thomas Tuchel is just throwing mud at things at the moment and seeing what sticks. I don't think he knows what his best team is. Certainly in the front line, he doesn't know who's going to get the goals from. But it's just weird when people are starting to hit a little bit of form from where they've been. He doesn't even get any minutes in a cup final when Liverpool are tired.
Yeah, it's strange, because he's kind of done that with all the front guys. You know, they're in and out and in and out, and then all of a sudden, Werner is a good example. All of a sudden he plays like 4 or 5 games in the trot, and then we're thinking, hold on, this guy's getting better, and all of a sudden he's not playing. So you do have to question that, but at the same time, you have to have a little bit of sympathy with Tuchel, because he's had nobody in the front line to rely on the whole season. You know, we're at the end of the year, and I'm telling you that I'm delighted that Havertz isn't playing from a Liverpool point of view. But he hasn't had Havertz for a whole season either. Havertz has missed periods of the season when he's been fit. So he's really not had any sort of core going forward that he's been able to rely on.
But has he been too stubborn tactically in that he hasn't set things up in a way that would have aided a Lukaku up front?
So you change your whole team for one guy?
If that guy's going to get you goals which you aren't getting in big games, then surely that's worth it.
Well, I don't know. If you've just won the Champions League, are you going to completely change the way you play for one guy? When the one guy you're bringing in, you think is going to suit your style of play and he's going to score goals. And when it doesn't quite work out, he then throws a hand grenade in with all this stuff about Inter Milan. So, no, I don't think he's been that stubborn. I don't think that's been the real problem.
No, I think I'd be interested to know who had the final say on the Lukaku signing. If Thomas Tuchel gave the go-ahead and said, this is it, I want it, it's on him. It's on him to figure it out, right? It's on him to know the player, to know the personality. But if it's somebody that he didn't want and he had to take him in, that's a different scenario. Then you try and figure out a way to make him a bit better. Didn't really want him, he's maybe caused one or two problems with the interviews, his form then dropped, a difficult scenario. But it's up to him as a coach to figure it out. But it's not a lot different apart from the quality of the game, it's not a lot different from the Carabao Cup final. Chelsea were wasteful when they did create chances in the final third. You know, Pulisic off the heel, Alonso with a bit of a heavy touch that let Alisson come out and smother it, one or two other chances. That's the big difference for them. You look at Liverpool, they've got goals, they've got 5 players that will score goals, and Firmino's out of form. You look at Tottenham, you've got Son and Kane that will get goals and others. City, it's all across the board. Chelsea, that's a huge problem. You can't just rely on one player. Mason Mount's got 11 goals. You need somebody chipping in from the front with 20 to 30 goals, and then you need some other goals from the middle of the park. They're not getting that.
Ned, it was interesting during the week, wasn't it? We were discussing the fact that maybe Haaland coming in would see Manchester City just completely dominate the league and take any competition away. And you said, yeah, but Dan, it's not only about having money, it's about where you spend it. Liverpool have been an example of how they've done that so well, as opposed to Chelsea. And you look at the signings that they've made, haven't had that same sort of impact.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and it's a shame for them. But to not go too deeply on Chelsea at this moment, you know, we're talking about them in cup finals, and for as much as they've not scored, Liverpool haven't scored either in those two. But it is over the duration of a season, and you know, maybe not everyone can get that sort of recruitment right. You bring people in and you're hoping they're going to have an impact, but they haven't really been able to consistently have that. I think you look at someone like Saul as well, who joined this season. You know, you've barely seen him kick a ball, but as I say, you just don't know. You do your research, you look into it, you know the people, you know their style of play, and you hope they hit the ground running. But for Chelsea overall this year, especially over the second half of the season, they've gone through some difficult circumstances. You can see it's affected not just the players, the whole club, and as a consequence, maybe they suffered a bit with that. But you know, they've got a chance this summer to potentially address some of that recruitment. Whether it's some people need to go, more people need to come in. But for them, I suppose they're looking to the future with the new ownership, and I think that is going to be key.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.